So in this video, I wanted to go through the rest of the axial skeleton with you. And we're going to start with the vertebrae. Okay, so this is a typical vertebrae here that I just wanted to illustrate the different parts for you on. So, most vertebrae will have a few features on them. They'll have what's called a spinous process. Kind of sticks up off the top here. It's this piece sticking up off the top. They'll have two transverse processes that stick off of the sides. They have a nice big fat body, right, which is going to be holding pretty much all the weight of your body. And they have a large hole here called the vertebral foramen. Now that vertebral foramen is used for the spinal cord to sit in. So these vertebrae are going to be used to help protect the spinal cord. Now the spinous process that sticks up off the top here, that actually points towards the posterior half of your body. And so if you bend over and feel down your spine, what you're feeling, those bumps are actually your spinous processes of your vertebrae sticking out, okay? So those are the typical parts of a vertebrae. Now let's talk about the different types of vertebrae that we have. So we have three different types or categories of vertebrae. We have cervical vertebrae, which are in the cervical region, which is at the very top, okay, of the vertebral column. These are typically very small, okay? You have 7 of these. Again, they're very, very small. And one thing that is unique about them is they have these two little holes beside their transverse foramen, right? These two little holes are, these two holes beside their transverse processes. These holes are called transverse foramen, and these are the only type of vertebrae that have those little holes, okay? So if you're trying to identify a vertebrae and you see those holes, you can automatically assume that it is a cervical vertebrae. They have very small spinous process, very small transverse processes, very small body. Again, very small vertebrae. Now, the first and second cervical vertebrae, those actually have a unique look to them, and so they had their own names given to them. So I'm going to show you those now. So this is the first cervical vertebrae, also known as your C1 vertebrae. And the name of this one is the atlas. Okay, this is your atlas. Now the atlas is unique because it does not have a body. So there's no big fat body there. It does have these little points of articulation, right, that meet up with the occipital condyles on the skull. So that's what those are used for. It still has those transverse foramen and the transverse processes, but the spinous process is extremely small. And again, there's no body present on this vertebrae. Okay, so that is the atlas. Now your skull can pivot up and down on these points here on the atlas, and so that allows you to nod your head yes. Okay. The second cervical vertebrae, when you look at it from this view, it looks very similar to any other type of cervical vertebrae, all right? But when you flip it over and look at the back side, like you see here, there is a piece that sticks off of it, all right? This piece that sticks off of the second cervical vertebrae is called the dens. You only see the dens in the C2 vertebrae. Another name for the C2 vertebrae is the axis, A-X-I-S. And what this dens is used for is the skull actually sits on this and it can pivot around the dens. Okay, so it allows you to shake your head no when the skull pivots around that dens. All right, so again, you have the atlas or the C1 vertebrae and the axis or the C2 vertebrae. And then you have just a typical cervical vertebrae, which makes up the other 5. Okay, so you have 7 total of those cervical vertebrae. The next type of vertebrae is called a thoracic vertebrae. Now, this one looks like a general vertebrae, but it has a very long, slender spinous process. And if you look at it from a lateral view, you notice that that spinous process is very skinny and it's very long and it's typically kind of pointy on the end, all right? Now, if you compare thoracic vertebrae to a lumbar vertebrae, sometimes they can look pretty similar. These two don't look very similar, but sometimes they can if you look at them from, a superior view. But if you turn them laterally and you look at that spinous process and the thoracic vertebrae, that's what's here in my left hand that I'm moving, it has a very long, skinny, kind of pointy spinous process. But the lumbar vertebrae has a very flattened and very broad spinous process that to me kind of resembles an axe head. So the way that I remember it is lumbar vertebrae, lumberjacks use an axe, right? And so lumbar vertebrae have this axe head shaped spinous process. I've also had students tell me that it looks kind of like a moose to them, and so they associate a moose with a lumberjack, and so that helps them remember lumbar vertebrae. So whatever helps you remember it, all right? So that concludes the vertebrae. So now let's get into the sacrum, all right? This large bone at the top, this whole thing here is the sacrum, and then this smaller bone kind of hanging off the bottom is called the coccyx, also commonly known as the tailbone, okay? So sacrum at the top, you have the coccyx down here on the bottom. Now there's a few parts to the sacrum that I want you to be familiar with. This crest that runs right along the middle of the sacrum, and turn it to the side so you can see how it kind of stands up here. That crest is called the median sacral crest. Word median means towards the middle, right? Sacral tells you it's part of the sacrum, and crest tells you it's kind of a ridge of bone that stands up. Now under the median sacral crest, there's a hollow cavity that runs under that called the sacral canal, okay? And that's where the terminal portion of your spinal cord would run, is into that sacral canal. Then on the back side of the sacrum, we have these little holes running down them. Those are called posterior sacral foramina, okay? Remember, a foramen is a hole. Posterior tells you it's on the posterior half, and sacral tells you it's on the sacrum, okay? So those are all the parts of the sacrum. And then we get to the sternum, right? So the sternum would sit right here in the body. There's three major bones that make up the sternum. You have this top bone, which is called the manubrium, and there are two notches on the manubrium I want to point out. You have the clavicular notches on either side, and your clavicles would meet up with those on either side. And you have what's called the jugular notch in the middle, okay? So those two are part of the manubrium. Then this long, large bone right in the middle is called the body of the sternum, right? Body of the sternum. And this small bone sticking off the bottom, it's kind of hanging off by itself, it's called the xiphoid process. Now that bone is commonly broken when performing CPR. A lot of times that bone accidentally gets broken during that, right? Now these cartilages attached to the sternum are called costal cartilages, and those are going to be helping attach the ribs to the sternum. Now I don't have a rib model in here, but you have three different types of ribs, okay? Two of those types of ribs attach to the sternum, and the third type does not, okay? They only attach to the back, to the vertebrae. The first type of rib is called a true rib. True ribs have a direct attachment to the sternum, okay? So this would be a true rib, the one that attaches to this cartilage. This one would be a true rib attaching here. This would be a true rib. This would also be a true rib. This would also be a true rib. And then this one, way down here, see how its cartilage still directly attaches to that sternum? This rib that attaches to this would be the last true rib, okay? And then the two under that, see how their cartilage meets up with the cartilage above them and does not directly attach to the sternum? So these two that attach here would be considered false ribs, okay? Their cartilage still attaches to the sternum, but it does it indirectly. It has to attach to the cartilage above it. Now the last type of rib is called a floating rib, and those do not attach to the sternum at all. So again, those are only going to be attaching to the vertebrae, okay, in the back. So you guys go through the rest of those axial skeleton bones and let me know if y'all have any questions.